Good day, student. The advanced certificate in secondary education student and the student that are doing biology modules, which is under the following code, ACS BIO11. Good day and welcome. My name is Victoria Shilongo, and during this section, we are going to give you guidelines on how to prepare for your examination. Looking at the topic that you need to pay attention, remember this module, it's a very thick module, but yet a fascinating module because biology is fun. Why biology is fun? It's about us, living organisms. Familiarize yourself with the characteristic of living organisms, the classification of living organisms, and the diversity of living organisms. The characteristic, pay attention to all the 7 characteristics, starting from movement until reproduction. Look at classification. Classification, starting with a definition of classification, looking at method of how we classify living organisms, as well as the diversity of living organisms. The diversity of living organisms, here we are looking at in terms of the vertebrates and the invertebrates. There's a quite different variety of living organisms, starting from vertebrates and invertebrates. So look at the arthropods in terms of the insect, in terms of arachnid, crustacean, and myriapods. Now, look at in terms of what are the features, how are these features enable them to adapt to their function. Now, we go to the vertebrates. We have classes of vertebrates. We have the fish, we have the bony fish, we have the reptiles, we have the amphibian, we have the birds, and we have also the mammals. Familiarize yourself with all the information under the heading of those that I just mentioned. In terms of their features, in terms of their function, and also in terms of their adaptations to their functions. Now, diffusion, osmosis let's move on to the next one. The cell structure and the cell organization and the level of living organisms. The cell structure, here we are referring to the different parts that makes up a cell. Then we also look at the cell organization. The cell organization, here we are referring to the different levels that make up an organization. Starting from a cell, what make up a cell are different organelles. Now, a group of cells make up a tissue. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. A group of similar cells makes up a tissue. And different tissue makes up organ. Different organs make up an organ system. And different organ system makes up an organisms. Now, you need to make sure you familiarize with such content, example of cells in animal as well as in plants, example of tissue, example of organ, example of organ system, both in plants and in animals. Diffusion and osmosis in plants and animal is our next topic. Now, within diffusion and osmosis in plants and animal, we are looking at how are the substances, how are the molecules move into and out of the cells. They either move into and out of the cells by diffusion or osmosis. Now, familiarize yourself with such information very well. Nutrition in plants and animal. Nutrition in plants and animal, here we are referring to how plants take in, how how do they make their own food? We have quite a long topic there. How do they make their own food? What are the different nutrients? An animal, what are the different nutrients that animals take in? What are their function? What are the food additive? What in terms of the poverty? What are the disease that are associated with not eating certain nutrients? When you look at a balanced diet, like carbohydrates, what are the different type of carbohydrates? What is the function of carbohydrates? Looking at protein, what are the different type of protein? What is the function of protein? The fatty, what are the different type of fats that we need in our body? What is their function? The minerals, the different type of mineral. Your book has quite an interesting and good information about minerals that are specified there, as well as vitamin B, vitamin B6, B14. You need to look at them in terms of their function and their source. Source means where do we get them? The dietary fiber is also part of nutrition in animal. What is the function of dietary fiber? Which food can provide us with dietary fiber? Now, let's move on to the next one. The importance and the application of enzyme. Here we are looking at the enzyme in terms of the definition, the property of enzymes, in terms of the example of enzyme, especially the digestive enzyme, as well as why are enzymes important. And as I said, enzymes are important because they speed up chemical reaction. They help chemical reaction to take place faster, which enable living organisms to carry out daily activities. Application of enzyme. Where do we use enzyme? We use enzyme in food production to make food. We use enzyme in plant growth. When a plant grows, the seed contain enzyme which help it to germinate. We also use enzyme in washing powder. And those washing powder that contain enzyme, we call them biological washing powder. Now, transport system in human beings. Transport system in human being is also the next topic. Transport system in human being. Here this topic is an interesting one because it looks at how are substances such as oxygen, it's a gas, carbon dioxide is a gas, as well as nutrients, digested nutrients such as amino acid, which is a digested protein, glucose, a digested carbohydrate, fatty acid and glycerol, a digested fat. How are these substances transported throughout our body? They are not just transported there in a vacuum. They are transported in structure that look like pipe, small pipe. And those structure we call them blood vessels. The blood vessels are the artery, the vein, and the blood capillary. Now you need to know the structure of these blood vessels. The structure of vein in terms of their thin muscular wall, in terms of their valve, vein has valve, and also in terms of a wider lumen. You should also be able to know the function of the valve. Remember, it allows blood to flow in one direction. And it also prevent the backflow of blood. Also, look at in terms of the capillary, the function of the blood capillary. Remember, the tissue are surrounded by the blood capillary. And also the artery, in terms of the structure of the artery and also the function of the artery. Now let's look at malaria. Malaria, you should be able to know the onset symptom of malaria, the preventative mechanism of malaria, as well as how we can treat ourselves when someone is infected by malaria. Now, let's move on immunity. Immunity here, we are looking in terms of the different type of immunity that are found in our body. Immunity is the ability for living organisms to protect themselves against diseases. It doesn't mean that the body is not exposed to pathogen. It is, but the body has mechanism. Once those pathogen enters our body, those pathogens are immediately identified, engulfed, and destroyed before they make a person sick. Sometimes you might wonder, you heard someone saying, I don't get sick. Yes, it's true. That means they have a stronger immunity. Meaning that once the pathogen enter their body, their immune system is able to engulf those pathogens, destroy those pathogens before they develop a disease. Now, when you look in your notes there, immunity, there are two types of immunity. There is what we call active immunity and passive immunity. As the word says active, please take note. Active, your body is producing antibody against pathogen. But passive immunity, the body is receiving ready-made antibody. When a person receives ready-made antibody or an animal receiving ready-made antibody, that means their own immune system is unable to produce own antibody or is activated to produce own antibodies. Let's look at it also in terms of homeostasis. Homeostasis, interesting topic. Remember, it means, the definition of it is the maintenance of internal constant environment. Remember, we are surrounded by external environment, but we have an environment inside our body. An environment inside our body, we call it internal environment. You have noticed perhaps that the environment outside our body, it keeps changing. In the morning, for example, it was cold. The middle of the day, it get warmer. When the sun set, it get a bit cooler. So the temperature in our external environment does not remain constant. It keeps changing. But when we look at the internal environment, our body has a mechanism in place that ensure homeostasis occurs. Remember, as I said, homeostasis is a maintenance, maintain meaning that keeping the environment inside our body within a narrow range. Why? Because these organs that are inside our body, the kidney, the heart, the brain, the tissue, the muscles I'm referring to, the liver, these are the same liver that you had when you were a child. They are in the same environment, and they need to have that same environment throughout for them to function carefree. Now, so take note, homeostasis, this is where we have temperature, how we maintain an internal body temperature. Remember, a human being's normal, our body temperature is always within a range of 36 and 37. That is important because our tissue our enzyme can only function best at that temperature. If the temperature drops, our enzyme will be less active. Less active meaning that our enzyme will not be able to speed up chemical reaction faster. The chemical reaction inside our body will be slower. That means respiration inside our body will take place at a slower pace. You will release energy at a slower pace. You release energy slowly. So that means will be less active. So again, what happens when the temperature rises? Our enzyme will be destroyed. We say that they will be denatured. And once they are destroyed, they will not come back. And human beings can die. That's why homeostasis is important, because it ensures that our internal environment is maintained at a certain rate. Which environment I'm talking about? The temperature inside our body. The amount of sugar in our body, which we call blood glucose, it's maintained in our body, as well as the amount of water in our blood, it's maintained within a narrow range. Now, when it comes to homeostasis, this is also where you have issue of negative feedback. Negative feedback, we are referring to how your body responds in relation to a change factor. What happens when your blood glucose level drop? What happens when your body temperature drop or rises? How do your body respond? So that's also important there. Pay more attention to such information. This is also where we have how the concept of vasodilation and vasoconstriction. When the body temperature rises, what happens to your blood vessels? They dilate. And when your blood vessels dilate, we call it vasodilation. In order to transport more blood, which carry more heat to the surface of the skin, so that this heat can escape the body, so that more blood can be transported to the sweat gland to secrete more sweat to escape the body. And once you sweat, the water evaporates, leaving your body cool, resulting in a cooling effect. So, also the blood glucose level is part of homeostasis. You need to pay attention to it. Let's move on. Digestion in human beings. Digestion in human beings, we start with the teeth. The human beings has 4 sets of teeth. We have the incisor, we have the canine, we have the premolar meaning that before molar, and the moral. You should be able to identify them, you should be able to label them, should be able to state their function. And also, when you talk about digestion here, look in terms of how tooth decay occurs. Look also in terms of, this is the information under the heading digestion in human beings. You should also be able to look in terms of the nutrients that we take in our body, in our mouth. When the nutrients are taken in our mouth, which nutrients is digested in our mouth? By which enzyme? For example, we have carbohydrates starts to be digested in our mouth by an enzyme called amylase, which is found in our saliva. And once carbohydrate is digested in our mouth, it is digested into a product called maltose. Now, this is not a final product. Maltose moves down to our stomach, where it is further digested into glucose by an enzyme called mitase. So familiarize also yourself with how amino acid is formed, how protein is digested. Proteins start to be digested in the stomach by an enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin digests protein into polypeptide. And polypeptide move, so that means the chyme, which contains polypeptide, move into the duodenum. In the duodenum, there are enzyme which is coming from the pancreatic juice, and the enzyme is called trypsin, which further digests polypeptide into amino acid. Now, such digestion, also pay attention to when digestion stops, when all the nutrients are digested. It's not really, doesn't sound well to say when all. When most of the nutrients are digested, and this occurs in the ileum. This is where digestion stops, where in the ileum. What happens is that these digested nutrients are absorbed by the finger-like projection in the ileum called villi. So familiarize yourself with the information on villi, the structure of the villi, the function of the villi, how are the villi adapted to perform its functions, as well as after the food are absorbed by the villi, where do they go? We have a concept of assimilation, the usage of nutrients in the body. So, as well as the digested product, how are these transported throughout the body? So pay attention to that. So let's move on to the next topic, reproduction and pollination in plants. Reproduction, here we are referring to reproduction in plants as well as in animals. Now, reproduction in plants, there are two types of reproduction that occurs in plants. They are asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when an organism is formed from only one organism. So that means it's a type of reproduction that occurs without the fusion or the joining of gametes. Now, here you have, for example, a good example is when you have a plant, you cut off branches, you put it in a similar condition meaning that same temperature, same soil type, like where you took from, like the plant where you took these branches. You'll find out that these branches will start to grow into a new plant. That is a reproduction. You have a new plant. And remember, that type of reproduction, we call it asexual reproduction. There are different methods of asexual reproduction, such as budding, grafting, layering. So familiarize yourself with this. Also, familiarize yourself with the advantage of asexual reproduction and the disadvantage of asexual reproduction. For example, let's quickly look at the advantage of asexual reproduction. It's simple. Simple means you only need one parent. You don't need a male and female. You only need one parent, whether male or female. As long as that species is there, reproduction will, asexual reproduction will occur. And remember, this take place in plants. Now, another example is that if now the parents, let's say for example you have these strawberry plants, and the strawberry plant produce sweet strawberry, and big, smooth, fresh, good, brighter. So that means the new plants that you cut off from the mature strawberry, their fruits will be exactly the same. So that is the advantage. The disadvantage is that of asexual reproduction, if the parent's plant has a disease, it will be passed on to their offspring. Another disadvantage is that there is no variation. They cannot withstand changes in temperature or weather. And remember, always the weather is constantly changing. Now, let's move on to pollination in plants. Again, familiarize with yourself with what is pollination. Remember, it is a transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma. Not just the anther, you must say from the male anther to the female stigma. Be able to know the different part of a female flower and a male flower. Take note, starting from the anther, the stigma, the style, the carpel, as well as the filament, as well as the petal and sepals. Now, this flower pollination, they are agent of pollination. Agent of pollination means things that help pollination to take place. Now, such as wind, birds, human beings, animal, and water. Now, you should be able to distinguish between wind-pollinated flower and insect-pollinated, wind-pollinated flower and insect-pollinated flower. You should also be able to distinguish between self-pollinated flower and cross-pollinated flower. So the information is clearly indicated, nicely presented in a table format. It can be a distinguish, it can be an explanation, it can be a description, whatever the answer be, but familiarize yourself with that. Cell division. Within cell division, we have, like the word says, cell division, like the title is saying, it looks at how a cell divides. There are two types of cell division, mitosis and meiosis. You should be able to compare. First of all, before you compare, you should be able to define what is mitosis and what is meiosis. The information is in your textbook there. And remember, meiosis, it halves the number of chromosomes of a new cells. So that means meiosis, the number of chromosomes are reduced. But mitosis, the cell retain the number of chromosomes as the parent cell. Now, you should be able to know that. You should also be able to give what is the significance, what is the importance of meiosis. Meiosis allows variation because meiosis allows the combination of gametes from the male and female. Mitosis, the significance of mitosis. You should also be able to know the significance of mitosis in terms of it enables organisms to form cells that are identical. Now, for example, a typical example that I like to give to my student is that on your skin, here on your arm or your finger, you accidentally injured yourself. Now, what happened is that you have a wound. The new cell that will be formed will be exactly like the old cells. That is good because it maintains that uniformity. It maintains the same cell. Imagine new cells that are different from the old cells are formed. Everyone will be able to notice that, what happened here? Why you look so different here from, why? So mitosis maintain the same cells. It ensures that the cells are the same. Now let's look at, moving on. Remember, these modules cover the whole textbook. Energy flow. We are now looking at energy flow. Within living organisms, we have living organisms in an ecosystem. how energy move. And remember, energy flow from one way only, not two ways. From one way means energy, the primary source of energy is the sun. From the sun, plant absorb energy because they do have a pigment called chlorophyll. And plant, when they absorb that energy, they store it. And when animals feed on plants, they obtain energy. So that means you have a sun, you have a producer, then from the producer, energy flow into primary consumer. These are animals that feed on plants. Early grade, we learned that the primary consumer are herbivores. Then we go to secondary consumer. The secondary consumer are animals that feed on primary consumer. And we have tertiary consumer. These are animals that feed on secondary consumer. And we have a decomposer. So that is how energy flow within the ecosystem. And take note, every time energy flow from one element to the other, some of the energy are lost. So that means not all the energy that come from the sun are absorbed by the plant. Some are lost. Some are reflected back when they land on the soil. The same apply to the plant. When a plant produces food and the animal feed on that plant, not all the energy are transferred to the next animal. Some of this energy will be used for movement in that animal. Some of those energy can be used for defecating, to release feces. Some of them can be used for urinating. Some of the energy can be used for sweating. So what we are trying to say, the energy flow is not 100%. Some of the energy lost through the way. What is important there is that the closer you are to the herbivores, that means, the closer you are to the producer, if you eat more food that are obtained from plant, the more energy you are going to get, because this food has more energy. Now, nutrient cycle. When we're talking about nutrient cycle, we are referring to nutrients such as water, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. These nutrients keep recycling within the ecosystem, and you should be able to know and give explanation on water cycle, label arrow indicating the water cycle, carbon cycle, and nitrogen cycle. Population factors. Population factor here we are referring to the population of any species, human beings specifically, or it can be elephant. What are the factors that influence the growth of the population, or what are the factors that decrease the growth of that population? We have factors such as food supply, the disease, as well as predation, the predators. Now, those factors can either increase or decrease depending on their supply. If there is more food, there is less disease, less predator, the population will increase. Now, the opposite is true. If there is a shortage of food supply, there are more disease, and there are more predators, the population will decrease. Now let's look at, we evaluate, the last topic there, we evaluate human influence on the ecosystem. We are looking at what impact do we have on our ecosystem. What are some of the human activity that we do that influence the ecosystem? Looking from pollution, acid rain, so deforestation. Those are some of the human activity that we carry out that influence the ecosystem. Look at, carefully read that chapter so that you are able to answer the different question coming from those chapters. Now, this module, it's very thick. So therefore, you need to prepare well in advance. Prepare well in advance because all those topics that I gave you earlier, they have a lot of content. So you need to familiarize yourself with all the content under those chapters. Don't just read to memorize, read to understand. Once you read to understand, then you will be able to answer all different questions coming from all those topics. Now, again, my advice to you is please try to do your task, your assessment task, on time. Once you do that, please use your evening, use your weekend to study. Especially this course is an advanced program. So it has really not complex but more information that require you to master. And once you put more effort there, you will be able to do well. For any information or anything that is not clear to you, please email me on that email on your screen, or call me on 081. Call me, Mishilongo, on 081 328 7071. 081 328 7071. Between 5 and up to 6:30. 5 up to 6:30 in the afternoon. All the best. You can do it. Just give more time. Just pay more attention to those topics indicated. Thank you.